So for this batch, we're doing oatmeal. We're going to leave it dry and then add fruit. So according to the packaging, 40 grams is a serving. So that's this, half cup when it's dry. And then you add a cup of water, which then total would be 267 grams total. And then I've got 30 grams of coarsely chopped cranberries. We're going to have cranberries, strawberries, and apples. So we're going to do kind of coarse chopped type stuff. So we've got 1.25 pounds of dry cranberries. And these are cranberries that we bought some time ago. They're just dry cranberries. And I'll coarsely chop them like this so that they'll mix in there nicely. And then when we bag them, we'll bag the oatmeal plus the fruit to make a bag ready to pour into a bowl, or just pour the water into the bag. The plan is just to have the cranberries, coarsely chop them, and then those will go onto the freeze dryer tray. So I'm hoping I can get 2 fruits on 1 freeze dryer tray. I should be able to if I do 1.25 pounds of each. That would be 2.5 pounds on the tray, just like I've been doing. So anyway, I just coarsely chop them because I don't want them too fine, but I don't want them as whole as they are right now. I just coarsely chop them like that, and then those will end up on the tray. So there's my bag of coarsely chopped cranberries, dried cranberries. I'd like to try it with fresh cranberries and make my own, but I already had these. Next, some of the frozen apple slices that we got earlier. So I want to chop these up into kind of smaller cube pieces to go with the oatmeal. And I'll do about 1.5 pounds of those, or 1.25 pounds of those. Going for that kind of shape. So the eggs are done and put away. So here's the water from the eggs, so a little bit more than a full gallon. And now we'll get it set up for the next batch. So the next batch is going to be oatmeal. I'm freeze drying dry oatmeal, so it hasn't been cooked, and also some cubed apples or diced apples, some of the cubes of strawberries, and some dried cranberries. We'll add that to the mix when we bag the oatmeal. So we'll get this pre-cooling and get it ready for the freeze drying. So we'll get the thermometer underneath. Okay. So we'll make sure we have a ring all the way around. We'll get the drain valve closed and we'll check that. So we have a ring all the way around there. We know the seal is not going to be leaking while it pre-cools. So we'll get that pre-cooling, and as soon as it's cold enough, we'll get the things on the tray and get them in. So I'm going to go custom, start, and continue. It says it's starting out at 65 degrees, so it shouldn't take too terribly long to be ready to go. I would have guessed it's 70 down here, so I'm not sure how accurate that is. The freeze dryer's been pre-cooling for about 1.5 hours already, so it's well below zero. Time to get the stuff on the trays. I'll have to adjust the tare weights a little bit probably, because I'll add a little bit of parchment paper. This is what this batch is going to be. This is 1,800 grams of raw oatmeal. It's been chilling. 1,800 grams of oatmeal plus 225 grams of brown sugar mixed in with it. And I'll probably have to mix it a little bit when I go to bag it to make sure that it's distributed. And then we have 1.25 pounds of the strawberry cubes. 1¼ pounds of apple cubes, and 1¼ pounds of coarsely chopped dried cranberries. So all of these are going on the trays. We'll start with the fruit. We'll have 1½ trays of that, and then the oatmeal will go on the rest. Starting with tray 1. And to keep them separate, and this is where I have to adjust it a bit, to keep it separate, I'm going to add a piece in between. So I'll have another piece here that I'll fold like this and put it around the halfway point to act as kind of a barrier between the two halves. Okay, does that make sense? So I need to adjust the tare weight to 758. Okay. Now, on one side of that, I'll put the apples, and then on the other side, I'll add the cranberries. So I'll end up with, well, if I don't lose too much, I'll end up with 2½ pounds on this tray. Kind of have to smooth it out a bit. Push it down into the corners. And add a thermometer. Oops, I need the weight first. That'll give me my before weight. So 1922, so I'll be able to calculate the water. It would be fine to do it with the thermometer if I left the thermometer in before and after. It's just as long as you do it the same. Now, tray 2. Okay. And I'll add an additional piece of parchment on this one also. Now I'll get the strawberries on this one. And this one I'll want to, oh, and I need to adjust that weight. So 751. I'll get the strawberries on one side. I'm going to set this down here for just a second so I can kind of mush them down. So that's 1320 with just the strawberries. I'm going to go ahead and do the net weight of the strawberries right now. That means the strawberries alone are 569 grams. And that should be just about right because that's 1¼ pounds. Okay, now we'll add the oatmeal. I want about another 1¼ pounds on there. I'm going to set that down for a minute and kind of squish them down. 1733. I want to get a thermometer in there, and I'll have to take that out if I add more so I can know the weights. And tray 3. And this one should be fine with that piece of parchment on there. And then I want to try to get half of this on there. I'm going to go ahead, I don't need this now. I'm going to go ahead and get both of these. I'll get both of these going at the same time so I can just pour them on there. And hopefully I can get all this oatmeal on there. So then we'll see how even they are. I'll try to get them pretty even weight-wise. Get those on the scale and check it. 1576. Well, those are pretty close. I'm not going to bother changing them. They're close enough. Tray 3, 1522. And again, I'm going to poke a thermometer in there about 2/3 of the way down. And tray 4 and 1576. And we'll get this one in there. All right, now those are ready for the freeze dryer. We'll go over and get them in. It's been pre-cooling for about 2 hours now, and it says it's -28. So obviously colder than what I'm putting in. So we'll get those in there. And starting at the bottom, tray 4. And these 2 bottom trays, or the oatmeal in general, will have very little moisture in it. But I want to make sure it's very well dried to go with the fruit, so we can bag it for breakfast foods. And probably the cranberries are actually the most fruit because they're already dried. Probably should have used less of those. Oh well, this is what we've got. So, and all the thermometers are showing 10 degrees or less, so nice and cold. And yeah, the clunk instead of squish. So we'll check to make sure that the seal is complete and around there. And right now it is not. There's some space here. So I'm going to give that just a little twist with the little palette knife. Make sure that that seal is out there and leaves a ring on it. So let's double check that. So we've got a good seal ring all the way around that. So I know it's sealed. I know that I'm not going to get air going through there and leaving an ice ring on the seal, which then has to melt when it starts and pulling in air. I've got it set for 4 more hours for pre-freeze, so a total of 6, and 2 are already gone by. The food was frozen before I put it in there, and the oatmeal probably doesn't need to be frozen at all. There's just no liquid water in it. It's all just the water that's bound with the food, just because of the relative humidity and things. Anyway, so it should be good to go. It'll be about 2 days from now before we take it back out. And it might act a little odd because we've got 2 trays that have a decent amount of moisture on them, and then 2 trays that have extremely small amount of moisture. I'm hoping it won't go to the small batch cycle because of the lack of moisture, but I'm hopeful the fact that there's a tray and a half with more moisture on it, that it'll be okay. If it's not, we'll add more time or restart it and have it do the small batch cycle 2 sets of times. We'll find out. So until then, don't go away. We'll be right back. It'll be just a second. The freeze dryer's been running now for 10¼ hours total. 6 hours of that was the freeze time, and then it's got 4¼ hours of the main dry cycle. The problem is the oatmeal. The oatmeal has almost no water. It's kind of like the rice. But with the rice, there was the other 2 trays were also dry things. With this, it's strawberries and apples and cranberries. They have water in them that we want to freeze dry out of them. The problem is it went to the small batch cycle because, as I feared, there wasn't enough moisture to drive it up high enough to go through the regular cycles. I'm going to open it, so that means stopping it, and that means I'm going to have to reset it because it's going to go to the final again. But I want to move that top tray that has the apples and cranberries down to tray 3, or shelf 3, where the thermometer is, or the temperature probe. That's where the temperature probe for this machine is, on the bottom of that tray. Maybe that will help a little bit, because then there'll be a little bit more of a cold sink because of the frozen apples sitting on there. That's my hope, because right now the bottom tray says about 50 degrees. The next tray is 40 degrees. The next tray is -32. The top one's about a -35. So the top 2, of course, aren't warm because there's frozen stuff on them. So the bottom 2 are almost finished already, relatively speaking, and the top 2 are still frozen lumps of fruit. They haven't gotten very far. Yeah, there's very, very little ice in it. So what I'm going to do is actually cancel out of it, or yeah, basically cancel out of it, restart it with a very short freeze cycle, because it really doesn't need that. It just needs to go to the main dry again. So let's see what we can do. I was afraid that might happen. So you can see it's down to 11 cycles. When I checked it earlier, 3 hours ago, 2 hours ago, it was 20 cycles, so it goes pretty fast. This will be done soon. This won't do. So I'm going to do a restart. Yeah, I don't know what else to do, because I need the fruit to get warmer. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel it. And then I'm going to do a complete restart. So no defrost. Going to restart with customize. Start cycle. And start. Now I'm going to open the drain valve so I can move those trays. So I'm going to open the drain valve so I can let the pressure in to equalize it. I'll open it and I'll take tray 1 and move it down to the 3rd spot, and maybe rotate it too. So I'm going to take that one out. I'm going to just leave it this way. So I'll make sure that that's sealed. It's more important than ever for this one. So it's sealed back in there. I've got that on the other one. The barrel is still almost down to the cold that it's supposed to be. Yeah, it's good and frozen everywhere. The thermometer underneath says about -25 still. It's already been going for 10 1/4 hours. I'm going to make a note for 10 1/4 so I don't forget those 10 1/4, because they won't show up on here. I added a little post-it note to the screen cover saying that I restarted it at 10 1/4 hours, so I won't forget that part. Move this down here so it doesn't cover that for the next piece. So I probably don't need 6 hours of freeze, since everything's further along than that. So I'm going to go with 3 hours to refreeze to make sure everything's really cold. I don't know if adding any freeze time at this point is really necessary, but I want to make sure that the fruit stays all the way frozen and is below the temperature it needs to be for proper freeze drying. So I'll let it freeze for 3 hours. It's still -20 on the fruit, so I think it's fine. This will just make sure. So this is an odd batch. We'll come back and check it later. So you can see it's on the last cycle of the small batch cycles. It's only been in the main dry part for 8 hours. So it's 11 or 12 hours total. I gave it 1 more hour of freezing for a total of 4 hours of freeze time, and now it's been going for an additional 8 hours. Well, that's nowhere close to what I need for the fruit. So unfortunately, the apples and strawberries have barely even started. So as soon as that finishes that last small batch cycle, it's going to jump to final dry. And I guess I'll let it do that, and then I'll just have to add a lot of final dry time because the fruit has barely started. It's just not enough time for it. So there's the bottom thermometer in oatmeal. You can see it's around 70 degrees. So that one's oatmeal also, and it's about 70 degrees. The strawberries, it's still a little lower than -20. It has barely started to freeze dry. And the apple cubes are also about -20, -18, 16, something like that. Anyway, they're very cold still. They've barely had a time to start freeze drying. So it's going to take a lot more time. This is one of the big dangers or problems of mixing batches. if you have those things that are very dry in there at the same time with the things that aren't, it's simply going to have a very difficult time. You can see that it jumped to the final dry, and now it has 11 hours to go until it thinks it's finished. But it won't be finished because the fruit hasn't had enough time for drying up to this point. Because the small batch cycle, it's been cycling on and off and not staying on long enough to drive the moisture out of the apples and the strawberries. We'll have to give it a lot of extra time probably and then recheck it. But I do know that it can't be done until the temperature of all the thermometers are at least 110, 120. We'll come back, we'll watch it, and come back later. The oatmeal and the fruit has been in there for about 32 and a half hours now. This says 22 and a half hours, but if you remember, I already did 10 hours and it went through the small batch cycles, and then I restarted it, and now it's been 22 and a half more hours, and it's almost finished with the final dry cycle. The problem is, because of the mixed batch, it's nowhere near finished. The tray with the fruit on it aren't even close. So the one tray is about up to freezing now, freezing of water. It's about 32 degrees. The other tray is still at only 20 degrees. It's nowhere near finished drying. The oatmeal ones are about 105, 110 degrees. They're doing quite nicely. But the fruit isn't anywhere close. So my options are, I could take it out, kind of stir them around, which is not a bad idea. Or I could just stop it, restart it like I did last night, and it'll go through another small batch cycle set, and it'll be done in another 20 hours like this time. Or a third option, I could just add a whole lot of time to the final dry and just let it keep heating overnight. It'll still cycle the heaters on and off because it's still trying to keep the heaters or the trays at about 120 degrees. And the temperature probe is on that second tray up on my machine near the back. So it turns on the heater for a little while, it gets about 120, 125, it turns it back off, and it cycles on and off still. I don't know what the best way is. The very best way would be to not mix the things in there. But I really want to have this mix of things when I go to bag them. I want to put 1 serving of oatmeal with 1 serving of the fruit in the bag. So when we go to use them, it's just the way we want them. So there's not a lot of choices. I mean, you know, the 3 main options that I see. By the time you see this, it'll be too late for you to give me ideas of what I should have done. I should have done this as a live stream, then I could ask you, and then you could have told me, hey, do this 4th option that I didn't think of yet. So anyway, if you come up with a better idea, let me know. So the logical thing would probably be to take them out and stir them around so that they're more evenly dried. I really don't want to take them out right now. So I'm just going to add a lot of time, and I'll take them out in the morning, stir them around after I warm them up for the drying check. So anyway, now it'll have the 10 1/4 hours of last night, and then the 22 1/2 hours of right now. And then I'll just add a bunch of final dry time. So I'll write that down. It was set for 11 hours, so maybe it'll have 20 hours of final dry. We'll find out. So I've got about 22 1/2 hours. Add that to this, and that would be 23:10. So I'm adding 10 more hours. So, we'll see you tomorrow. now that I have the first 500 complete, as far as videotaping them, of course I'm a little slow in editing, so now I can finally rehydrate some of the things. So I'm really looking forward to trying out some of the oatmeal. So this is the oatmeal with the strawberries, and it needs about 264 grams of water. I have the water, I got it boiling. Now I'm going to add this to the bowl. And you could pour the water directly into the bag, but visually I thought it would look better if you could see it. Okay, so oatmeal, a bit of brown sugar, and then the little strawberry cubes. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And that allegedly is 1 serving. When with the oatmeal package, it says to add a cup of water. So this is the water for all of that, including the strawberries. So I do not know how that'll do. I'll put it on here, and I might have to microwave it to add a little more heat, and maybe it'll be too liquidy. I don't know. So we'll come back in about 15 minutes and test it. 15 minutes later, we'll check to see how it is. I would say that's a bit soupy still. So maybe I should only add like 3/4 of that amount of water. So next time I'll try a little bit less water. Let's see how, I want to try just one of the little strawberry cubes first. Okay, perfectly rehydrated. And oatmeal is definitely soupy, so did I get the wrong measurements, or is it supposed to just heat longer? I think it's supposed to cook longer, because that's still a bit harder than I would expect. So I think I'll microwave that for a few seconds and then test it again. Want to test it? Strawberry was perfect.
You can heat it first.
Okay, so going to microwave that for just a bit and retest. Okay, so I microwaved it a little long, so some of it escaped out of the bowl in the microwave, but that did thicken it up. So you got to decide how much water you want to put in according to how you like it. I actually like mine a little bit thicker, so the next time I'll do it, I think I'll add maybe 30 or 40 less grams of water. But it worked well. The flavor's good. I can taste the little bit of brown sugar that I put in it. I can taste it. There's just a little hint in the background. Yeah, it's got a good strawberry flavor. That's good. I like it. That's simple and it works nice. Okay, well that one works. Oatmeal that way was quite successful. It adds a nice fruit flavor to it. I would definitely recommend that. And you can get a lot of servings in a single batch in the freeze dryer. We did 45 servings this size in there. And that's so much better than just plain oatmeal. So that's it on that one.